Hello summoners and welcome back to Mobalytics, where today we will have the patch 8.20 tier list Q&A video. Starting off with the questions from YouTube, we have Blade asking why is Anatolii not even B tier in high elo? We received quite a few questions about Anatolii's absence this week, and rightfully so. A lot of higher elo and challenger players permaban her and say that she's OP. You even see her popping up in competitive play at Worlds, so why is she not here? The best way to explain it is to remember that our tier list is directly catered towards climbing. A good example would be a champion like Draven or Aurelion. Both Draven and Aurelion have similar learning curves to Anatolii and similar mechanical difficulty, yet you do see them be more successful in the long term given the time investment. The other thing is that Anatolii is likely to be nerfed in the future due to her competitive play viability. With Anatolii, she has a sub 50% win rate, and you might say, yeah, that's because she's really hard to play. But you know who else is hard to play? Riven Nidalee. These champions are very hard to play, and even for high elo players can be complicated, yet these champions have significantly better win rates, not just a little bit better, we're talking 5 to 6%. The other thing is that we kind of think Anatolii might be a little bit overrated. Granted, she is a great champion, and we're not saying that Anatolii is not good. In fact, it might be an oversight for us not to at least put her B tier. I agree with you that probably she should be B tier, but even in competitive play, if you genuinely look, Anatolii across the board in competitive play and solo queue does not have above a 50% win rate. She's negative across the board. But you're right, I think that it's potentially that she should be at least B tier on our list for climbing, and in terms of champion power, maybe A tier, but again, we don't necessarily recommend her. Next up, let's have a question about Aurelion Sol. Aurelion Sol is always S tier on almost every single patch tier list, but you guys never mentioned him once. Could you give us some more information? Why do you guys put him so high and others don't? As a D5 A Sol main, I do think he's good, but sort of outclassed by other champions. For starters, we do talk about him. We have talked about him in the past. It's just that he hasn't really moved from his S tier priority in several patches, so for people who have watched the tier list every single time there's a new patch, they would know what the explanation behind him is, but I definitely understand if you've never seen the tier list before or you're new to it, yeah, we don't really talk about why he's S tier. As far as A Sol, I do think other tier lists put him very highly, and if they don't, they definitely should. The champion is just the best solo queue champion in the game, hands down. Exactly what you need to be good in solo queue, A Sol does that. Aurelion is also a great recommendation because he's not likely to be nerfed due to a lack of competitive play viability, just like we talked about with Anatolii, and nobody really talks about him. He kind of just sits there as the best champion in the game and nobody wants to play him or abuse him properly, except for the super high elo players who understand this champ's not fair. Moving on to the questions from Instagram this week, Aiden Krause says, why is Sejuani not mentioned on any part of the tier list? I picked her up last week and she's extremely strong and has tons of CC and tankiness. For Sejuani, this champion has been competitively viable for the last 2 seasons almost, and almost the entire season this year ever since she got that rework, and she has been really good in high elo until she received nerf after nerf after nerf, and now that Sejuani has received many different nerfs and continues to get them, realistically you're not going to see her. She's really not that bad. I mean, her ultimate and CC and tankiness, you can just gank early game and get out of the early game by snowballing your laners. And remember, as always, if you're having success on a champion, continue to do that. The tier list is supposed to work for 90 to 95% of people, but you still have that 5%. Right? If we say that Brand is S tier and some person who plays Brand just doesn't have any success and they play a C tier champion or a D tier champion, something that's not even on our list, but then they do well, then you should stick to that. You shouldn't stick to a tier list as telling you to, deviate from what you're doing if it's working for you. You should look for a tier list if your champions aren't working for you, to give you recommendations for what you should be trying. My name is Soups wants to know what's the justification for Cain not being S tier. He does way too much damage no matter what form you pick, and he has too many tools to succeed in early game where he's supposed to be weak. For Cain, we are strong advocates that he is a good champion right now. There's even a guy in Challenger who has reached top 10 or top 15 who is a Cain main, and we think this champ is great. Don't get me wrong, we definitely think Cain is good. He still just does lack some of the things. When you say early game tools where he's supposed to be weak, against really good players, yes, he still is weak. However, that criticism might be okay if we're thinking about the normal tier list, the one that's not high elo. You might be right, because only really against some of the best junglers in the game, or S tier junglers, or a challenger one, are you truly going to be punished for that early game and have a hard time getting out. You are going to rely on your teammates a bit more to make sure that they don't completely, crap the bed before the early game, kind of ends, and then you're 0-2 on Cain and all of your laners are 0-5. That's one of the reasons why he's not S tier. Finally, our last question this week from the blog comes from Firex Freak, who said, what's the difference between picking an easy skill floor champion from the high elo list versus the general list? Let's say comparing Jax from the general list to Pantheon in the high elo list. I guess for Pantheon you have certain power and level spikes that need to be taken advantage of. Is that the only difference? This is very interesting. This might be my favorite question we've ever received, so thank you for that. This is a good question. As far as the low elo list, the general list, the idea is that a low mechanical champion or a simple learning curve champion essentially would be something that has such low variance in the way that their kit works and is so simple that it teaches you about the game in a broader scope and the bigger picture instead of worrying too much about the champion that you're playing. So that would be the most important thing. You can think about things like a Mumu jungle, you can think about things like Soraka support or Sona support. You can think about some of these things where the champion's kit is so basic that it teaches you how to play the role and how to play League of Legends and not really how to play that specific champion. However, when you get to the higher ranks and you see champions like Pantheon, it becomes much more about pretty much what you said, certain level and power spikes. You want to be able to abuse that early game, abuse that early game. You also need to move around the map and gank. These things become expected of you. Arguably, under the impression that we didn't want to confuse people, so we do keep the learning curves consistent, maybe Pantheon would be a more average or harder learning curve champion in the lower elos, but it's expected that you can actually play your role in higher elos, if that makes sense for what I'm trying to say. It becomes much more about how you abuse your level 6 on Pantheon. Did you actually use your ultimate at level 6 to find a gank and find a kill? On Twisted Fate, are you playing the map? These things become expected of you in high elo. Alright guys, this has been the patch 8.20 tier list Q&A. If you have any more questions, let us know in the comment section down below. Let us know anything that you want to talk about. We're always here to read them and answer your questions, so be sure to let us know. Use the product at mobalytics.gg, your all-in-one platform for League of Legends.